It was a perfect day to die. Blue skies, bright sunshine, and a thick blanket of fresh, pristine snow covering the Austrian Alps. For Prince Friso of the Netherlands, it was paradise. Minutes later, it became his grave. An avalanche, a white silence, and 18 months of coma before death. This is the story of the fateful moment when a perfect day ended in a silent abyss, and how a prince's greatest passion became the instrument of his fate. His entire life has been a negotiation with the title he was born with, not a rejection, but a careful, intelligent recalibration of its meaning. He has meticulously planned and built a life on his own terms, a life of intellectual achievement and professional success far from the formal duties of the Dutch court. He has made hard choices, sacrificed a place in the line of succession for love, and forged an identity based on merit, not bloodline. He is a man who has, by all accounts, successfully taken control of his own destiny. Up here, on this mountain, he is the master of his own movements, choosing his own path down the vast, white canvas. He makes a decision, the kind that has defined his character, confident, daring, and moving away from the prescribed route. The groomed, packed down slopes are for tourists, for those who prefer safety and predictability. The real magic, the true test of skill and nerve, lies off-piste in the deep, untracked wilderness of the backcountry. A level 4 avalanche warning, the second highest possible, is in effect for the area. It's a serious risk. A fact he, a man trained in engineering and risk assessment, would have understood perfectly. It is a calculated risk, the kind a man of his intelligence and experience has likely taken and successfully navigated countless times before. But nature does not negotiate. It does not recognize titles, achievements, or carefully laid plans. As they ski into the secluded valley, the postcard-perfect silence is suddenly, violently shattered. It is not a loud crack, but a deep, gut-wrenching rumble, a sound that seems to come from the very core of the earth. The mountain, with an indifferent and terrifying power, gives way. A vast slab of snow 100 feet wide and thick as a building breaks loose above them. The world dissolves into a churning, roaring white chaos. One man, thrown by the initial impact, manages to inflate his avalanche airbag and fights his way to the surface. The other, Prince Friso, is swallowed whole, dragged under by the immense, unstoppable force. For 20 agonizing minutes that stretch into an eternity, he lies buried deep under the crushing, suffocating weight of the snow. His world is reduced to a freezing, silent darkness, the precious supply of oxygen in the small air pocket around him dwindling with every passing second. When an Austrian rescue team, guided by the faint electronic pulse of his avalanche transceiver, finally locates his signal and pulls him from his icy tomb, his heart has stopped beating. They fight desperately, a frantic battle against time and the cold to bring him back. And miraculously, on the side of that silent mountain, they do. But the man they save is not the man who was lost. The brilliant mind, the architect of his own independent life, has been plunged into a deep and silent abyss. This is the tragic final chapter in the life of Prince Friso of Orange-Nassau, a story that is not about the loss of a crown, but about the fierce, often painful quest to live an ordinary life in extraordinary circumstances, and the cruel, random twist of fate that proved no amount of intelligence or planning can ever truly protect us from the fragility of our own existence. To truly understand the path Friso chose, a path of deliberate separation and self-definition, one must first understand the unique institution he was born into and the remarkable woman who shaped it, his mother, Queen Beatrix. The Dutch monarchy of the late 20th century was a delicate and complex balancing act. On one hand, it was one of Europe's oldest and most respected royal houses, the House of Orange-Nassau, a name synonymous with the very creation of the Netherlands as an independent nation. It was an institution of immense constitutional importance, deeply woven into the political and social fabric of the country. On the other hand, it was trying to be something new, something more suited to the famously liberal, pragmatic, and egalitarian spirit of the Dutch people. It was often called a bicycling monarchy, a term that conjured images of accessibility and a lack of pomp, a stark contrast to the grand ceremonial monarchies of Britain or Spain. This modernizing impulse was fiercely driven by Beatrix. She had ascended the throne in 1980 upon the abdication of her mother, Queen Juliana. Juliana's reign had been characterized by a warm, maternal, almost informal style, which had been beloved by many, but had also led to periods of instability and controversy. Most damaging had been the Lockheed Affair of 1976, a major international scandal in which Friso's own grandfather, Prince Bernhard, was accused of accepting more than $1 million in bribes from the U.S. aircraft manufacturer Lockheed to influence the Dutch government's purchase of fighter jets. The scandal rocked the nation, tarnished the monarchy's image, and forced Prince Bernhard to resign from his official positions. For Beatrix, a woman of immense intelligence, discipline, and a formidable sense of duty, this was a formative crisis. She saw firsthand how a lack of professionalism and clear boundaries could threaten the very existence of the institution she was born to lead. When she became queen, she was determined to run the monarchy like a modern CEO. Her style was the opposite of her mother's. She was formal, hard-working, and meticulously professional. She referred to the royal house as the firm, a business that needed to be run with efficiency, dignity, and an unwavering commitment to constitutional propriety. She transformed the monarchy from a somewhat folksy, family-run affair into a sleek, modern enterprise. Into this world, on September 25, 1968, Johann Friso Bernhard Christian David was born at the Utrecht University Hospital. He was the second of 3 sons born to then Princess Beatrix and her husband, Prince Claus. His older brother, Willem-Alexander, born a year earlier, was the heir apparent, the boy whose destiny was inextricably linked with the destiny of the nation. His path was clearly marked from the moment of his birth. His younger brother, Constantine, would arrive a year after Friso. As the middle child, Friso occupied that unique and often challenging position of being the spare. He was royal, yes, with all the privileges and pressures that entailed, but he was not the future. This position, free from the crushing weight of direct succession, but still firmly within the orbit of the throne, would grant him a sliver of freedom that would ultimately define his entire life. The family's early life at the secluded Drakenstein Castle was an attempt to create a bubble of normalcy in a profoundly abnormal existence. Beatrix and Klaus were determined to give their sons a grounded upbringing. They were sent to regular state schools in the nearby town of Barn, and the Queen made it clear to the teachers and other parents that her sons were to be treated no differently than any other child. They played hockey, went on scouting trips, and were expected to do their homework. Yet, the reality of their position was a constant shimmering presence. Their father, Prince Claus, was a particularly influential figure in Friso's life. A German diplomat by training, Klaus had initially been a controversial choice as consort due to his German origins, so soon after World War II. He was a highly intelligent, sensitive, and thoughtful man who himself struggled with the often ill-defined and restrictive role of a prince consort. He suffered from bouts of depression, a struggle he later spoke about publicly with great courage, and found it difficult to carve out a meaningful professional role for himself. It's highly likely that Friso, the most intellectually inclined and introspective of the three brothers, saw his father's struggles and drew a powerful lesson from them. He saw that a title without a clear purpose, a life of purely ceremonial duties, could be a recipe for profound unhappiness. He witnessed the frustration of a brilliant man constrained by protocol. This, perhaps more than anything, fueled his own ambition not just to have a career, but to build a life of tangible achievement, a life where his success would be measured by his own efforts, not by the accident of his birth. From an early age, it was clear that while Willem-Alexander was learning how to be a king, Friso was learning how to be something else entirely. He was the quiet one, the boy with the dark, serious eyes who always seemed to be observing, analyzing, and constructing a different kind of life for himself. He wouldn't run away from his family, whom he adored, but he would run towards a life of his own making, a life that would take him thousands of miles away to the epicenters of global innovation and finance. The first step on that journey was a bold and unconventional choice for a European prince. He was going to America. Friso's decision to begin his higher education at the University of California, Berkeley in 1986 was a radical departure from royal tradition and a clear signal of the kind of life he intended to lead. European princes of his generation typically attended ancient universities in their own countries, or perhaps in the United Kingdom, studying predictable subjects like history, law, or economics. Berkeley in the mid-1980s was something else entirely. It was still pulsating with the cultural and intellectual legacy of the 1960s free speech movement. It was a global hub of scientific innovation, a hotbed of progressive politics, and a place where conformity was viewed with suspicion. For a young prince from the formal, structured court of the Netherlands, it was a world away. And that was precisely the point. He enrolled not in the humanities, but in the College of Engineering, choosing to study mechanical engineering. This was a demanding, ruthlessly logical discipline that had nothing to do with royal protocol or statecraft. It was a world of thermodynamics, fluid mechanics, and material science. His success would depend not on his name, but on his ability to solve complex mathematical problems. He lived for a time in a fraternity house, a quintessential American college experience that must have been a universe apart from the stately rooms of Drakenstein Castle. He was just Friso from Holland, another student grappling with difficult coursework, enjoying the laid-back California lifestyle, and relishing the precious gift of anonymity. Here, he could be judged on the content of his character and the quality of his mind. These 2 years in California were formative. They broadened his perspective, solidified his independence, and confirmed his belief that a meaningful life was one that he would have to build for himself. He returned to the Netherlands not to slow down, but to double down on his demanding technical education. He enrolled at the Delft University of Technology, one of Europe's most prestigious and rigorous engineering schools. He chose to specialize in aerospace engineering, a field at the cutting edge of technology and innovation. In 1994, after years of intense study, he graduated with a master's-level engineer's degree. He had now proven beyond any doubt that he possessed a formidable intellect capable of mastering some of the most challenging technical subjects in the world. He had an expertise that was entirely his own, earned through hard work and discipline. But Friso was not just a brilliant engineer, he was also a pragmatist. He understood that in the modern global economy, power was wielded not just in laboratories and design studios, but in the boardrooms and trading floors of international finance. To truly navigate and succeed in the world he intended to conquer, he needed another set of skills. So he embarked on the final stage of his formal education, enrolling at INSEAD, the elite international business school, with campuses in Fontainebleau, France, and Singapore. In 1997, he earned his Master of Business Administration, MBA. His educational journey was complete. He was now armed with a unique and powerful combination of credentials, a deep understanding of advanced engineering, and a mastery of high-level business strategy. He was not just Prince Friso of Orange-Nassau, he was Friso, the Berkeley and Delft-trained aerospace engineer with an MBA from INSEAD. He was ready to step onto the world stage, not as a royal, but as a player. The carefully constructed life plan was proceeding perfectly. With his academic arsenal complete, Prince Friso stepped not into a waiting sinecure at a Dutch cultural foundation, but into the most demanding arenas of modern global capitalism. His choices were, as always, deliberate and demanding. He sought out not the easiest path, but the most respected and the most challenging, environments where his royal title would be, at best, a momentary curiosity, and at worst, a liability to be overcome through sheer competence. His first stop in 1995 was the Amsterdam office of McKinsey & Company, the world's most prestigious and notoriously demanding management consultancy. To work at McKinsey in the mid-1990s was to be at the apex of the business world. The firm was a legendary factory for future CEOs, a place where the brightest minds from the best universities were thrown into a high-pressure up or out culture. Consultants were expected to work punishing hours, travel constantly, and solve the most intractable problems for the world's largest corporations, all while maintaining an aura of supreme intellectual confidence. It was a world of data-driven analysis, brutal honesty, and a relentless focus on performance. For Friso, it was the perfect testing ground. Here, in the sleek modern offices overlooking the canals of Amsterdam, he was no longer a prince. He was an associate, a junior member of a team of fiercely intelligent, often arrogant high achievers. His days would have been a blur of spreadsheets, PowerPoint presentations, and intense brainstorming sessions. He would have been dispatched to client sites, perhaps a major Dutch bank struggling with deregulation, a national airline facing new competition, or a manufacturing giant looking to streamline its operations. He would have spent weeks living out of a suitcase, interviewing middle managers, analyzing supply chains, and building complex financial models late into the night. The work was impersonal and intellectually grueling. Success was measured not by etiquette or protocol, but by the cold, hard logic of a well-argued recommendation. He was surrounded by people who had been top of their class their entire lives, for whom failure was not an option. In this environment, his royal background was irrelevant. No one at McKinsey would be impressed by his lineage if his financial model had a flaw or his presentation was unconvincing. He had to deliver day in and day out, and by all accounts he did. He survived and thrived, proving that the intellect honed at Berkeley and Delft was more than capable of holding its own against the best in the business. He earned the respect of his colleagues not because he was a prince, but because he was smart, diligent, and a valuable member of the team. His time at McKinsey was more than just a job, it was a validation. It was the first definitive proof that he could succeed in a world governed by pure meritocracy. But Amsterdam, as competitive as it was still his home turf. For the next stage of his plan, he needed a bigger arena, a global stage where he could truly test his limits. He set his sights on London. If McKinsey was the intellectual boot camp of the corporate world, then the international division of Goldman Sachs in London, during the late 1990s was its special forces. This was the undisputed epicenter of global finance, a place of almost mythic ambition, wealth, and pressure. Friso joined the investment bank as an associate in 1998, just as the dot-com bubble was inflating to its most dizzying heights. London was electric, a city awash in money and a belief that the old rules of economics no longer applied. And Goldman Sachs was its high temple. To work there was to enter a different reality. The hours were even more punishing than at McKinsey. 80-hour weeks were the norm. 100-hour weeks were not uncommon. Young bankers would routinely pull all-nighters, fueled by caffeine and takeout food, hunched over their desks in the firm's imposing Fleet Street headquarters, perfecting the minutiae of a multi-billion-dollar merger or a game-changing initial public offering. The atmosphere on the trading floors was a cacophony of ringing phones and shouted orders, a place of high tension where fortunes could be made or lost in seconds. It was a culture of extreme competition, where every individual was constantly measured, ranked, and pushed to their absolute limit. Friso's role in the investment banking division would have placed him at the heart of this storm. He would have worked on complex cross-border transactions, helping companies navigate the intricate worlds of acquisitions, divestitures, and capital raising. The work demanded not only analytical brilliance, but also immense stamina and a kind of emotional armor to withstand the constant stress. For Friso, a man who valued his privacy, this loud, aggressive, and often brutally impersonal environment must have presented a profound challenge. Yet it was a challenge he had clearly sought out. By choosing Goldman Sachs, he was making another powerful statement. He would not shy away from the toughest arenas. He would compete with the sharpest minds in the world and succeed on their terms. His life in London was a world away from The Hague. He lived in a comfortable but not extravagant home, and his life revolved around the demanding rhythms of the bank. He was forging an identity that was entirely separate from his royal roots. He was Friso, the Goldman Sachs banker. This period in London was crucial, not just for his professional development, but for his personal independence. It was here, living as a highly successful but relatively anonymous professional, that he solidified the foundations of the private life he had always craved. He had proven he could make it on his own. After leaving Goldman Sachs, he continued to build on this foundation of meritocratic success. He first joined Wolfensohn and Company, a London-based advisory firm founded by the former president of the World Bank. He then reached the pinnacle of his professional career, taking on the demanding role of Chief Financial Officer, CFO, for Urenco, a leading international uranium enrichment company. This trajectory, from elite consultancy to global investment banking and finally to a key leadership position in the energy sector, cemented his identity as a formidable figure in the world of international business, an identity forged entirely on his own terms. The idea of a prince helping to launch a low-cost airline, a company designed to make travel accessible to the masses in post-communist Eastern Europe, was a perfect encapsulation of his modern, pragmatic, and business-focused worldview. He was not interested in the trappings of royalty. He was interested in building things, in innovation, and in the real-world mechanics of the global economy. It was during this time, while living this carefully constructed, independent life in London, that he met the woman who would not only complement his world, but complete it. To understand the depth of their connection and the crisis that would later engulf them, it is essential to understand that Mabel Wisse-Smit was, in every sense of the word, his equal. She was not a princess, a duchess, or a society heiress. She was something far more formidable, a woman of immense intellect, courage, and a profound moral purpose, who had built her own remarkable career on the front lines of some of the world's most challenging geopolitical crises. Mabel's story begins not in a palace, but in the pragmatic middle-class world of the Netherlands. She studied economics and political science at the University of Amsterdam, graduating with high honors. But while many of her peers were embarking on conventional careers in business or government, Mabel was drawn to a more difficult and dangerous path. The early 1990s were a time of great upheaval in Europe. The Berlin Wall had fallen, but the optimistic dream of a peaceful, unified continent was being shattered by the brutal ethnic conflicts erupting in the former Yugoslavia. While the world watched in horror, Mabel decided to act. She began working for the United Nations, taking on a role that would take her directly into the heart of the Balkan Wars. She was instrumental in peace-building initiatives in Bosnia and Herzegovina, a country ripped apart by ethnic cleansing and the worst atrocities seen in Europe since World War II. This was not a comfortable desk job in Geneva. It was difficult, often heartbreaking work on the ground, trying to foster dialogue and reconciliation in communities ravaged by violence and deep-seated hatred. This experience forged in her a steely determination and a deep understanding of the complexities of international conflict. Her passion and intelligence did not go unnoticed. She went on to co-found the European Council on Foreign Relations and became the European director of George Soros's Open Society Institute, a foundation dedicated to promoting democracy, human rights, and the rule of law around the world. In 1995, she co-founded War Child Netherlands, a charity dedicated to helping children in conflict zones. By the time she met Prince Friso, Mabel Wisse-Smit was a highly respected and influential figure in the international human rights community. She had briefed world leaders, navigated complex diplomatic negotiations, and dedicated her life to giving a voice to the voiceless. She was a woman of substance, of action, and of unwavering principle. They were introduced in Brussels by a mutual friend, Laurentium Brinkhorst, a sharp and engaging woman who was then dating and would later marry Friso's younger brother, Constantine. Their meeting was not at a royal ball or a society gala. It was a meeting of two people who inhabited the same international professional world, a world where ideas and impact mattered more than titles. The connection was instant and profound. In Mabel, Friso found a woman who not only understood his desire for a life of purpose beyond the confines of royalty, but who was living an even more impactful version of it herself. In Friso, Mabel found a man who was not defined by his princely title, but who possessed a keen intellect, a quiet strength, and a deep sense of decency that resonated with her own values. Their relationship blossomed in London, away from the intense glare of the Dutch media. They built a private world together, a partnership of equals. Their conversations would have been about far more than just pleasantries. They would have debated foreign policy, discussed developments in global finance, and shared their experiences from their respective demanding worlds. He was not just a prince, and she was not just an activist. They were two brilliant, driven individuals who had found in each other a shared worldview and a deep, abiding affection. For Friso, a man who had spent his life meticulously planning his independence, meeting Mabel was the one variable he could never have anticipated. She was the missing piece of his carefully constructed world. In June 2002, they announced their engagement to the world. The initial reaction in the Netherlands was overwhelmingly positive. The Dutch public, who had watched Friso grow into a serious and accomplished man, were thrilled. They saw in Mabel a perfect modern princess, intelligent, compassionate, and with a career that commanded respect. It seemed to be a fairy tale for the 21st century. The brilliant prince finds his match in a brilliant and dedicated human rights champion. The wedding was planned, and their future seemed bright and full of promise. They were the embodiment of a new, more modern, and more purposeful kind of royalty. But as they prepared to formalize their union, a shadow from Mabel's student past, a name whispered from the violent Amsterdam underworld of the late 1980s, was about to surface. This ghost would not just threaten their wedding, it would trigger a constitutional crisis that would shake the Dutch monarchy to its foundations and force Prince Friso to make the most profound and painful choice of his life. The carefully planned world he had built was about to collide with the unpredictable and often unforgiving reality of public life. With their engagement announced in the summer of 2002, Prince Friso and Mabel Wisse-Smit seemed poised for a future that perfectly blended the modern with the monarchical. The Dutch public, by and large, embraced the match. They saw a prince who had consistently demonstrated his seriousness and intellect, choosing a partner who was not a decorative aristocrat but a woman of global substance and moral conviction. The narrative was compelling. This would be a power couple, a new kind of royal partnership for a new century, one that could leverage its unique platform for genuine good in the world. As the initial plans for the wedding were laid, and the government began the routine constitutional process of granting consent, a sense of optimistic excitement settled over the nation. But beneath the surface, in the newsrooms of Dutch investigative journalism, and in the memories of those who had inhabited the country's criminal underworld a decade earlier, a ghost was beginning to stir. To understand the explosive nature of the crisis that would become known as Mabelgate, one must first understand the ghost himself, Klaas Bruinsma. In the Netherlands of the late 1980s and early 1990s, Bruinsma was not just another gangster. He was a figure of almost mythic proportion, the undisputed godfather of the Dutch drug trade. He was not an uneducated thug. He was the son of a successful businessman, intelligent, charismatic, and famously ruthless. He built a vast criminal empire, becoming one of the biggest drug traffickers in European history. His life was a blur of extreme violence, opulent yachts, and shadowy deals. His assassination in 1991, gunned down outside the Amsterdam Hilton, was a national event, the bloody end to a reign that had both terrified and fascinated the public. Any connection to Bruinsma, however distant, was radioactive, a link to the darkest, most violent corner of modern Dutch history. The first whispers began as vague rumors in the press. Journalists, performing their due diligence on the future princess, started to probe her student years in Amsterdam. It was during this period that Mabel, known to be a passionate sailor, had moved in circles that occasionally overlapped with the flashy, free-spending world that Bruinsma inhabited. The key question was the nature of that overlap. In early October 2003, as the parliamentary debate on their marriage approached, the story broke wide open. The popular and often sensational crime reporter Peter R. de Vries aired a segment on his television program that featured a bombshell interview. The source was Charlie de Silva, a man who claimed to have been one of Klaas Bruinsma's most trusted bodyguards. What de Silva alleged in a calm and detailed testimony was devastating to the official narrative the couple had constructed. Friso and Mabel, in their initial disclosures to the Prime Minister, Jan-Peter Balkenende, had acknowledged that Mabel had a superficial acquaintance with Bruinsma. They painted a picture of occasional chance meetings within the Amsterdam sailing scene. Da Silva's story was starkly different. He claimed that Mabel had been a regular presence in Bruinsma's life for several months in 1989. He alleged that she was a frequent visitor to Bruinsma's yacht, the Neeltje Jacoba, and that she had spent nights on board with the drug lord. He didn't just describe her as an acquaintance. He described her as Bruinsma's girlfriend. To add even more weight to his claims, he stated that Bruinsma, who was paranoid about security, would refer to Mabel as that bitch who is screwing an officer of the law, a reference to the fact that her father was a senior civil servant. The testimony was a political earthquake. The Prime Minister, a man known for his moral rectitude and adherence to process, was now in an impossible situation. The Dutch Constitution required him to act as the political guarantor of the royal house. His government's credibility rested on the assumption that the information provided by the royals was truthful and complete. The chasm between the couple's account of a superficial acquaintance and the bodyguard's detailed claims of an intimate relationship was too vast to ignore. The core issue ceased to be about what a university student may or may not have done over a decade earlier. It became about a far more immediate and dangerous question. Had a prince of the Netherlands and his fiancée misled the head of government and, by extension, the entire nation? The trust that was the bedrock of the constitutional monarchy appeared to be shattered. The country was thrown into a frantic and deeply divisive debate. Was this a misogynistic witch hunt? A young woman being slut-shamed and unfairly judged for a youthful indiscretion? Or was it a legitimate crisis of integrity, a case of a royal couple attempting to conceal an inconvenient and embarrassing truth? The media firestorm was relentless. Talk shows, newspaper columns, and parliamentary debates were consumed by Mabelgate. The royal family, led by Queen Beatrix, circled the wagons, offering their unwavering support to Friso and his fiancée. But the political damage was already done. For Prime Minister Balkenende, the path forward was fraught with danger. If he ignored the new allegations and pushed the consent bill through Parliament, he risked his government being seen as weak, incompetent, or even complicit in a cover-up. If he confronted the couple, he risked an unprecedented constitutional clash with a deeply respected and popular monarch. He chose the path of constitutional duty. On October 10th, 2003, after a crisis meeting with his cabinet, Jan-Peter Balkenende stood before the nation and delivered his solemn verdict. The government would not be submitting the toe-stemming sweat, the law of consent, to Parliament. His reasoning was precise and damning. It wasn't about judging Mabel's past, it was about the present. He stated that due to the incomplete and incorrect information provided by the couple, the necessary trust for the government to request consent had been damaged. He spoke of a breach of trust. It was a stunning public rebuke, a moment of high political drama rarely seen in the consensus-driven world of Dutch politics. The government of the Netherlands was effectively blocking a royal marriage. The ball was now in Friso's court. He was cornered, trapped between the ancient institution he represented and the modern life he had chosen. He was now faced with the starkest ultimatum of his life. He could end his engagement to Mabel, apologize for the turmoil, and quietly resume his position as His Royal Highness Prince Friso of the Netherlands, third in line to the throne. He could preserve his constitutional status, his title, and his formal place within the House of Orange-Nassau. Or he could choose her. He could choose the woman he loved, the partner he saw as his equal, and in doing so, turn his back on the official life he had been born into. For those who knew him, for those who had watched him meticulously build a life based on his own choices, his decision was never in doubt. There was no hesitation. Just 2 days after the Prime Minister's announcement, Prince Friso and Mabel Wisse-Smit released a public letter. In it, they acknowledged that they had been naive and had made an error of judgment in not being more forthcoming about the past. They regretted the political turmoil their lack of transparency had caused, but they stood firm. They vehemently denied the more salacious details of the bodyguard's claims, but they did not back down from their commitment to each other. Friso's loyalty was absolute. He stood by her side, a silent but powerful statement that his private life, his personal commitment, was not negotiable. The constitutional consequences were immediate and automatic. According to the membership of the Royal House Act, any member in the line of succession who marries without parliamentary consent forfeits their right to the throne. By choosing to marry Mabel, Friso was formally renouncing his claim. He also, by extension, would lose his title as Prince of the Netherlands and his official status as a member of the Dutch royal house. It was the ultimate sacrifice, the final definitive step in his lifelong journey toward a private, self-determined existence. He had spent years building a professional life outside the palace. Now, for love, he was relinquishing his constitutional place within it. Their wedding on April 24, 2004, was a reflection of the tumultuous path that had led them to the altar. It was not a grand state occasion in Amsterdam, with cheering crowds and golden carriages. Instead, it was a more intimate and in many ways more meaningful ceremony held in the historic Oude Kerk, or Old Church, in the city of Delft, the city where he had earned his engineering degree, and where the founder of the House of Orange-Nassau, William the Silent, was buried. The guest list was a mixture of European royalty and the couple's close friends from their professional and private lives. Queen Beatrix and the entire Dutch royal family were there. Their presence a powerful and public show of unwavering family solidarity. But the shadow of the controversy was palpable. This was a family celebration, not an affair of state. It was a union born not of royal alliance, but of a deeply personal and hard-won choice. After the wedding, they returned to London to the life they had built together. They were now, in effect, private citizens who happened to be related to the Queen. Friso was granted the personal title Prince of Orange-Nassau as a courtesy, and their children would hold the title Countess of Orange-Nassau. But the formal link to the state was broken. They were free. The following years were a period of quiet, joyful consolidation. Their first daughter, Countess Emma Luana Ninette Sophie, was born in 2005. Their second, Countess Joanna Zaria Nicoline Milou, followed in 2006. Friso reached the pinnacle of his professional career when he was appointed Chief Financial Officer of the British-German-Dutch Uranium Enrichment Company, Urenco. Mabel, for her part, continued her influential work in human rights, eventually becoming the first CEO of the Elders, a prestigious organization of independent global leaders founded by Nelson Mandela. They had done it. They had weathered a ferocious public storm, made an immense sacrifice, and had emerged on the other side, seemingly stronger than ever. They had the life they had fought for, a happy, loving family, 2 brilliant careers, and the privacy to enjoy it all away from the constant scrutiny of the Dutch media. They had found their safe harbor, and every winter they would celebrate their hard-won happiness by joining the rest of the royal family for their cherished annual tradition, a skiing holiday in the idyllic, peaceful mountains of Lech, Austria. It was a symbol of their enduring family bond, a private escape into a world of beauty and tranquility. It was their happy place, a place so removed from the crises and complications of the world below, a sanctuary they believed was safe from harm. For more than half a century, the small, charming village of Lechem-Arlberg in the Austrian Alps had been the Dutch royal family's winter sanctuary. It was more than just a holiday destination. It was a tradition, a constant in a life of public duty and ceaseless change. The tradition had begun with Friso's grandparents, Queen Juliana and Prince Bernhard, in the late 1950s. They chose Lech not for its glitz or glamour. It was and remains a place of understated old-world luxury, but for its discretion and its genuinely challenging skiing. It was a place where they could, for a few precious weeks each year, simply be a family. The locals were fiercely protective of their royal guests, affording them a level of privacy and normalcy that was impossible to find back home. This annual pilgrimage became the bedrock of Friso's childhood memories. It was in Lech that he and his brothers, Willem-Alexander and Constantine, learned to ski, tumbling through the soft powder as young boys under the watchful eye of their father, Prince Klaus. It was here, away from the rigid protocols of the court, that the family could shed their formal roles. The queen was simply a mother and a grandmother. The princes were sons, husbands, and fathers. They would gather in the evenings at their hotel, the Gasthof Post, a cozy, family-run establishment they had frequented for decades, sharing meals, telling stories, and laughing. The annual press photo call at the beginning of the holiday was the price they paid for the peace that followed, a brief, cheerful performance for the cameras before they could retreat into their private world. For Friso, a man who guarded his privacy so fiercely, Lech represented the ultimate escape, a place of profound personal significance where he could reconnect with his family and indulge his passion for the mountains. In February 2012, the family gathered as they always did. It was a happy reunion. Queen Beatrix was there, as were all three of her sons and their families. Willem-Alexander and his wife, Princess Maxima, had their three young daughters. Constantine and Princess Laurentia had their children, and Friso and Mabel had arrived from London with their two little girls, Luana and Zaria. The photographs from the official photo call taken just a few days before the accident are almost unbearably poignant in hindsight. They show a smiling, relaxed family, bundled in their ski gear against the cold, the majestic white peaks rising behind them. Friso stands close to his wife and mother, an arm around his brother, a picture of quiet contentment. He looked like a man who had everything he had ever fought for. He had weathered the greatest crisis of his life, built a loving family, and achieved remarkable professional success. This holiday was a celebration of that hard-won peace. On the morning of Friday, February 17th, the conditions were deceptively beautiful. A heavy snowfall over the previous days had blanketed the region in a deep, tempting layer of fresh powder. But this beauty concealed a significant danger. The local authorities had issued a level 4 avalanche warning on their 5-level scale. This was not a minor advisory. Große Lawinengefahr, or high avalanche danger, meant that avalanches were not just possible but likely, and could be triggered by the weight of a single skier on an unstable slope. The official advice was unequivocal. All skiers should remain on the marked and secured pistes. Friso was an exceptionally skilled and experienced skier. He knew these mountains intimately. With him was his childhood friend, Florian Moosbrugger, the 42-year-old owner of the Gasthof Post, whose family had hosted the royals for generations. He, too, was an expert local skier. Their decision to venture off-piste into a well-known, but at that moment highly dangerous area near the Lizzi Alp can only be understood as the kind of choice that experienced experts sometimes make. A belief that their skill and knowledge could allow them to navigate a risk that others should avoid. They were both equipped with avalanche transceivers and, in his friend's case, an avalanche airbag. They were prepared for the risk, but no preparation can truly tame the raw power of a mountain. As they cut through the silent, untouched snow, a deep fracturing crack, signaled the mountain's betrayal. An instant later, the massive snow slab they were skiing beneath shattered and gave way. A slab avalanche doesn't flow like water. It shatters and moves like a solid plate, a tsunami of snow and ice moving at highway speeds, carrying with it an almost unimaginable force. Friso's friend was struck by the edge of the slide, but his airbag inflated, creating a pocket of air that helped keep him near the surface. Friso was directly in the center of the slide's path. He was hit by the full force of the avalanche, instantly swept off his feet and pulled under into the churning, violent mass. The moment the snow settled, an eerie silence returned to the valley. Friso was gone. His friend, bruised but alive, immediately switched his own avalanche transceiver to search mode and began a frantic sweep of the debris field. The signal from Friso's device was a faint, desperate pulse from deep beneath the surface. The emergency call went out, and the highly trained Leek Mountain rescue team responded with incredible speed. Within minutes, the area was swarming with rescuers, a helicopter hovering overhead. They pinpointed the signal and began probing the snow with long, thin poles, a grim and desperate search. Every second was critical. The chances of survival plummet dramatically after the first 15 minutes of burial. The sheer weight of the snow can be enough to cause fatal injuries. If not, the victim faces a race against asphyxiation. As a person breathes in a small enclosed air pocket, the carbon dioxide they exhale can create a toxic buildup. Alternatively, their warm breath can melt the snow around their face, which then refreezes into a solid ice mask, sealing off their airway. This is what rescuers believe happened to Friso. After 20 minutes of frantic searching, a probe struck something solid. The rescuers began digging with furious energy and uncovered Prince Friso, buried more than a foot deep. He was lifeless. He was not breathing, and he had no pulse. What followed on that mountainside was a testament to the skill and determination of the Austrian rescuers. They immediately began cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, a desperate, prolonged effort to restart his heart and force oxygen back into his brain. For nearly 50 minutes, a relentlessly long time in emergency medicine, they refused to give up. Finally, they managed to stabilize him enough to be airlifted to the University Hospital in Innsbruck, one of the leading trauma centers in the region. The news of the accident had already reached his family. Mabel and Queen Beatrix rushed from Lech to Innsbruck, a frantic nightmare journey, their world suddenly and irrevocably shattered. At the hospital, he was placed in the neurological intensive care unit. An international press contingent descended on Innsbruck, and a stunned world waited for news. For a week, the family kept a bedside vigil while doctors ran a series of tests to assess the extent of the damage. On February 24th, a week after the accident, Friso's medical team, led by Dr. Wolfgang Kohler, held a press conference. The medical team's assessment was devastating. Dr. Kohler spoke in calm, precise, and heartbreaking medical terms. The 50 minutes of CPR, while heroic, had not been enough to prevent catastrophic damage. The prolonged lack of oxygen had caused devastating injury to his brain. An MRI scan had confirmed the prognosis. He was in a coma, and Dr. Kohler stated it was uncertain whether he would ever regain consciousness. He added that even if consciousness returned, a process that could take years, the prognosis for any meaningful neurological recovery was grim. In early March, Prince Friso was transferred by a specially equipped ambulance aircraft to the Wellington Hospital in London. It was a logical choice. London was his home, the city where his wife and daughters lived, and the hospital was a leading center for neurorehabilitation. And there, in a quiet room, the long, heartbreaking vigil began. For the next year and a half, his life was suspended in a gray, silent limbo. The medical term for his condition evolved from a coma to a state of minimal consciousness. This is a profoundly cruel state, one that offers fleeting, tantalizing, and ultimately torturous glimpses of the person who was lost. Unlike a persistent vegetative state, a patient with minimal consciousness can show inconsistent but discernible signs of awareness. There might be a flicker of the eyes in response to a voice, a slight movement of a finger in response to touch. For Mabel and the family, every one of these small moments would have been a surge of desperate hope. They talked to him, read to him, played his favorite music, surrounding him with the love and familiar sensations of the life he had lost, praying that something might penetrate the fog and bring him back to them. She managed his care, shielded their 2 young daughters from the full horror of the situation, and continued her own demanding work, all while dealing with her own profound grief. She maintained a blog on the website of The Elders, and in one post she wrote with heartbreaking eloquence about the importance of hope, but also about the pain and sorrow that were a constant presence. During this period of intense private sorrow, a major public event took place. In April 2013, after a 33-year reign, Queen Beatrix abdicated the throne in favor of her eldest son, Willem-Alexander. While the decision was a long-planned part of the Dutch monarchical tradition, its timing was deeply poignant. In her abdication speech, she spoke of the joy her family had brought her, but also the sorrow they had endured. Stepping down from her role as head of state allowed her to step fully into her role as a mother and grandmother during the family's darkest hour. She was a constant presence at her son's bedside, a quiet, dignified figure of maternal grief. As the months wore on, the cruel reality became undeniable. The glimmers of consciousness were not leading to a recovery. The brilliant mind of the engineer and financier was not coming back. In July 2013, the family made the final loving decision. Prince Friso was moved from the Wellington Hospital back home to the Netherlands. He was not taken to a hospice or another medical facility. He was brought to Huis ten Bosch Palace in The Hague, the royal residence where his mother lived. It was a quiet, heartbreaking acceptance of the inevitable. There would be no miracle. They were bringing him home to die, to spend his final weeks in the familiar surroundings of the home he grew up in, cared for by his family. On the morning of August 12, 2013, almost exactly 18 months after the mountain had claimed him, Prince Friso died from complications related to the brain damage he had sustained. He was 44 years old. His funeral, held a few days later, was the final perfect reflection of the life he had chosen to live. It was not a grand state funeral with foreign dignitaries and solemn military processions. At the family's request, it was a deeply private ceremony held in the small historic church in the village of Lage Vuursche, the village adjacent to Drakenstein Castle, where he had spent his happy, carefree childhood. He was laid to rest in the churchyard there, under the shade of the trees he had played amongst as a boy. This choice of burial site in the quiet village of Lage Vuursche was itself a final poignant chapter in his story. In deliberately choosing this humble churchyard over the traditional royal crypt in Delft's Nieuwe Kerk, where Dutch monarchs are interred, his family made a powerful statement. They honored the life he had so carefully built, a life defined not by his royal title, but by his personal choices. He was buried not as a prince of the Netherlands who had lost his place, but simply as Friso, a son and husband, returned to the quiet earth of his childhood home. The images from that day were profoundly moving. His brothers, now King Willem-Alexander, and Prince Constantine, served as pallbearers, their faces etched with grief as they carried their brother's simple wood-paneled casket. His wife Mabel, dressed in black, walked behind with his mother, two women united in their immense loss. His godfather, King Harold V of Norway, was among the small group of mourners. It was not the funeral of a public figure, but the intimate farewell of a heartbroken family to a beloved son, brother, husband, and father. It was a quiet end for a man who had always valued the quiet, private corners of his life above all else. The legacy of Prince Friso is a story of profound and moving contradictions. He was a prince who worked tirelessly to become a private citizen, only to have his life and death become a global news story. He was a man of immense intellect, a meticulous planner who took control of his own destiny, yet his life was ultimately defined by a random, cruel act of nature. He gave up his claim to a kingdom for the woman he loved, creating a private world for his family, a world that was shattered on a snowy mountainside. To remember him only for the scandal of his marriage or the tragedy of his death is to miss the true meaning of his life. His real story lies in the years between, in the quiet, steely determination with which he pursued his own path. He was a pioneer, a new model for a 21st century royal who demonstrated that it was possible to be born into a palace, but to live a life of substance and meaning in the world outside. He valued intelligence over inheritance, integrity over titles, and love over protocol, proving that one's worth is not defined by birthright, but by achievement, character, and the choices one makes. But in the end, his story transcends royalty. It is a universal human story. It speaks to the ambition in all of us to forge our own identity, the desire to love and be loved for who we truly are, and the courage it takes to stand by our choices in the face of immense pressure. And it is, most powerfully, a heartbreaking reminder of the profound fragility of life. It teaches us that even for those who seem to have everything, for those who are brilliant and successful and loved, happiness is a precious and fleeting gift. Prince Friso never became a king, but in his unwavering quest for an authentic life, a life lived with purpose, with integrity, and with love, he left behind a legacy of quiet, profound, and uniquely human dignity.